Okay, welcome back from that brief break. We're here with Michael Lennon, and the session is Co-inferencing organizational symbiosis. So, Michael, thank you for joining. Take it away.
Hello, yes. I am so grateful to be here. I would like to approach today's conversation in a conversational style where I share what led me to active inference and how the discovery of the principles of free energy principle and active inference changed how I understood as a practitioner and how that has led both personal, professional, and organizational shifts in conversations, one of which will conclude in an invitation to this community to experiment with an organizational structure designed for building both the global knowledge commons as well as building individual ventures. So similar to the way in which, for example, Linux is open source, and then you have ventures building off of Linux to do things in the world that experimenting with such an organizational model for the active inference commons is an experiment worth taking on. So I don't want to let the final invite get away, but I'm going to backtrack and do this very much in a storytelling fashion. So I have some slides, but I'm not going to spend too much time. Well, in fact, let me just skip that. Just to recap what this conversation is about is different ways in which not just active inference, but science has collided with internal intuition and led to transformational journeys of different kinds. And so I would describe I started out as an individual, as a economist, and as a technologist working at institutions such as the World Bank and IBM and doing large-scale IT implementation projects. And that work often, although there was a lot of engineering, it was often the human factors that got in the way of success or failure. And so that has been a kind of orienting how to both be informed by what the science and the math provides, and then build how does the biologically based, if you will, a way of sense making affect or alter the evolution of successful project implementation. So just a little bit about where this project, prior to coming to active inference, I said project, my journey led me through was I had as I said, been trained as an economist. And one of the things that economists have is a point of view about what it means to grow the culture, to grow the society, and primarily denominated in dollars, and using GDP as a way of tracking whether or not one was impacting the experience of flourishing. And I came across a chart by an economist that showed that GDP had tripled in the last 60 years, both in the UK and the US, and that well-being had not changed at all. And this economist, who had been in office in the UK at the time when he left office, was kicked out. He went back to academia and started looking into what does science show moves the needle of well-being, and how do we make this socially more contagious? And I both loved the idea, but I also was shocked by that information, because as someone who was trained in a particular lens, a particular perspective, what I had been trained to do and how to cause effect and impact was in fact not moving the needle of well-being. And so there was this kind of personal and professional crisis that arose from this knowledge. And as I say, that led to this journey of unlearning in some ways, and in both personal, interpersonal, and organizational ways, recalibrating the experience of what does it mean to pay attention to thriving. And so that journey has been very satisfying. Not only do I understand how I need to be to experience more goosebumps in my life, I understand how I need to be to experience connection and belonging, and to co-create with others a sense of purpose and of meaning that I had not had previously. And it's one of the ways I sometimes describe this relationship between the subjective internal experience and the scientifically objective, let's call it, was that I might know how to go to the gym and flex my arms to get a workout, but by understanding anatomy, I could learn the bicep had a particular placement in the body, a particular arrangement, and I still had to do the workout, but I could more effectively and skillfully do the work that needed to be done of working out. And so similarly, the study of the science of well-being and social sciences of connections of groups and of how, for example, one of the surprising findings for me in the realm of happiness was a finding by an epidemiologist, and basically he was studying how do emotions spread, and he, in studying this, realized that your happiness was not only more heavily influenced by the people that you're surrounded by, but also by the next degree of separation, the people to whom they are connected, and even the third degree of separation. And so that these three degrees of separation predicted your happiness more than the way that I had been explained what happiness was, which was that it is an inalienable right, like life and liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and that it's subject to individual traits of my own, that if I just do me the best I can, that I'm going to be happier. And so all of a sudden, there's this disorienting insight in that it's not about being my best, but it's just as important to be my best. And so it's like, well, what the heck does that mean? What does it look like to inhabit one's own experience and one's own skin in a completely different way? And I know a conversation that you and I, Daniel, once had about the impact of active inference. You were describing how you might have been driving on the right-hand side of the road your whole life, and that all of a sudden you go to a place where everybody drives on the left. And so some intuitions still work exactly as they used to, but others are completely counterintuitive. And so this developing the capacity to go against intuition, against the familiar, is part of what sometimes these new forms of knowledge, there's knowledge that adds to what we know, and then there's knowledge that changes how we understand. And happiness first did that for me intuitively at the personal experiential level, right? At first was like, okay, I am playing the game of my own life inappropriately. How do I begin to be my best instead of be my best? And this is where some subsequent work in working personally and with groups and organizationally led to paying attention to what was happening in a different way. And so as I say, this crisis led to a very fruitful learning journey, and excuse me, I got distracted. Some of this led to writing different ways of describing how to do work. And so, for example, one of the spaces that I've been working in was in government consulting. And in government consulting, top-down is often the way to direct the effectiveness of the organization. You come up with the right strategy, you figure out all the components, and you then execute on the plan. And so, in a sense, if there are two forms of probabilistic prediction, Bayesian being one at the heart of active inference, and another one being Fisher. Fisher is one that says it knows where you need to go, and the way that you relate to surprises and to mistakes and to errors is you correct back to what you felt your original plan was. Whereas Bayesian probability obviously can have similar results, but also can update. Instead of reacting to surprise as something to be fixed, it can sometimes be something to be adapted to. And it changes the way that you manage the emergence of differing information from what you originally predicted. And so in the same way that I described that happiness had a disorienting effect on how to practice it, active inference has a similar disorienting effect about how to co-regulate, how to supervise the evolution of differences between what you expect and what you get. And one way in which I describe this to folks is it changes your understanding, or changed my understanding of how cause and effect works. That as I arrived to active inference, there were a couple of intuitions about how the world operated that active inference helped evolve. The first was that instead of the world being composed of objects that were fixed and stable, that the mathematics of how to explain things was much more of a dynamic verb. And so to look at the world as being not nouns, but verbs, and a way that I describe this for myself when talking to people about it is that instead of seeing myself as a self, a noun, that I'm a being. And so that paying attention to the continuous verbing and the relating to others is a different game. And so the interesting thing about active inference was that there was a mathematics for describing this that related the internal states and the external states through mathematics of information. That the way in which science works is familiar and intuitive to many of us. Let me rephrase this in a different way. That when I say the inside and the outside are informationally connected, that the outside is all the information, all the stimulus of the world, and that the inside creates a map of that world, and that the mathematics of creating that map not only reduce the world and is a mathematically efficient way of describing how to get the most signal for all the information that's being received, but that it also It also enables, like I was describing earlier with the understanding of the bicep, a more accurate way of sensing the world, of orienting to the world, and of responding to the world. Um, I I should have shared my slides instead of trying to talk through them, but I'm going to take a pause and ask any questions, or shall I proceed?
Yeah. I'll ask one question and then looking forward to the slides. DSK wrote, there has been a lot of talk around GDP not being a good enough metric of national development. Has your research informed you on a better metric? If so, does it have a working name?
So yes, and it's a different answer than a single metric. So a single metric was one of the problems, and the fact that it was denominated in currency was one of the problems. So one of the things that has shifted some of the work of the UN, of really a group led by Bill Bowie and Ralph Thurm on what are called contextual indicators, are that instead of an indicator being GDP is both currency, and it's set to a single. The denominator and the nominator of the indicator are both set in the same thing. So let me describe this in a different way. There has been a diversification of what are the things to pay attention to. So not only dollars, but also subjective experience of well-being, for example, better predicts the outcome of elections than does financial income. And so the idea that dollars are predictive, accurately predictive of outcomes, has been often relied upon and turns out to be maladapted, right? And so that's whether you're talking about biological phenomena, whether you're talking about social phenomena, there's a whole range of extra indicators that are now seen as not a single one, but better visibility into these different nested levels of life. The second, what I would call breakthrough type of indicator beyond GDP that I was describing, denominator and not numerator, is that most organizational reporting, for example, is for example, Starbucks might say, we are using 10,000 gallons less of water than we did last year. So we are improving our consumption and the way that we are related to the watershed that we might be related to. And all that reporting is, if you will, individual centric. And when you center your, just like as with happiness, where if you're just looking at the individual, you're missing an important part of the picture. When measuring your relationship to resources, to commons, to natural commons and social commons, if you put your individual behavior within the context of the collective, so let's say Starbucks says we used 10,000 gallons last year out of the total watershed, then you can begin to draw comparisons about how everybody is using the watershed as a whole, and how the percentage behavior of usage of the water has shifted, that can be compared from one to the next to the next. So if you will, you're putting these indicators in a similar language, in a similar they're speaking in a similar base than when they are reported individually. And so when looking at well-being, it's important not only to add additional things beyond money, but it's also important that these indicators be set to the same denominator, or you wind up not having the visibility that you need. And there's a huge catfight about this, because there have been a whole series of privileges and a whole series of social practices that are grounded in the way in which um, uh, individual corporations are structured. And so this kind of points to a different kind of natural mean that I wanted to bring up that might be of interest. So we talked about how with happiness, we're doing it individually and that we're missing the relational. When you look at cells that are part of an organism, if they are traumatized, they become more individualistic. They consume more, they reproduce more, and they grow into what we call a cancer because their, if you will, relationality is traumatized and they become more and more selfish. And so there's both a huge importance of paying attention to relationality at the level of the cell, at the level of the individual human, and some would say at the level of clusters of humans, such as organizations. And that with cancer, part of the new form of treatment has been to call the cells informationally back into relation. So instead of punitive burning those cells and killing them, it's to remind them of their relatedness, to restore them from a traumatized state back into relationship with other cells. And they begin to behave again in better relation to the body around them. And so that metaphor speaks to the importance of how do we call each other back into relation if the language of individualism is permeating both our individual behavior and the language of corporations is equally traumatized, because originally when corporations were first formed in the 1600s in the Netherlands, they were really people coming together to venture and do together what they could not do alone. So trading with the Far East was something that no individual no individual business owner could afford to venture, but by pooling their funds, they were able to do, and they were able to become a great trading power globally. This model of groups behaving as groups, so a different cluster of existence groups, and then behaving pro-socially with each other, is what grew the next level of economic performance and economic effectiveness. However, over time, some would say that organizations have become traumatized and have become disconnected both from the places where they originated as well as from all the stakeholders that they were serving. And so, for example, here in the US, when the Supreme Court last century, 2 centuries ago now almost, decided that financial stakeholders were the foremost important stakeholders in corporations, they distorted the relationality of corporations. And so it has become a kind of cancer that has become extractivist both upon its employees, upon the ecosystems in which it inhabits by architecture. So there are plenty of people that will tell you in an organization, we want to be more attentive to these other considerations beyond finance, but we don't even have permission because the agreements of the corporation have evolved from mutualism to selfishness, if you will, to more consumerism, more productivity, more surplus, and those all have a place. They're important, but they've become like the cells in the body that become cancerous. They've become overly they become individually oriented alone, and not sufficiently skillful at mutualism. And so this all comes back to a new basis for equipping organizations to pay attention to how they're interrelating within, between, and to things beyond their current purview. And it is as much of a disorienting and challenging bit of information as I was sharing the idea of learning how to be more skillful at happiness was to me personally. It's like, oh, I have to pay more attention to you for us to be happier, or to be the third degree of separation, as I was describing earlier, means that not only the people to whom I'm directly connected, but that it's my Dunbar number, the Dunbar number being presumably the 150 to the 250 people that you have meaningful relationships in your life, the Dunbar cubed. So it's beyond your direct sensory observation. And it's like, how do you co-harmonize across groups? How do you sing, to use a different kind of language, songs in common to which you're co-oriented? And these are some of the things that active inference provides a mathematics for how this works, that is fascinating, of how the synchronization of the individual to the group and the nesting and how the signaling happens across the nested groups. And so it's fascinating. The mathematics can be daunting, but the promise of it and the ability to do these things more skillfully and reliably is just, it gives me goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps. And this is part of why I'm trying to tell this somewhat ineffectively, I would say today, in a story manner and through experience, so that people can pull on the intuitions that they have, the memories that they have, and say, I dare to tackle this uncertainty, building upon these intuitions and feelings that I have, and co-experimenting with others forward. And so this is at the heart of what the original invitation that I mentioned was about, was, that instead of the classic hierarchical corporation that has as part of its founding documents, when you plant a seed and you use the template that says we're organizing according to these rules, even if you want to change, it's like, it's a lot harder to change the Constitution than it is some minor policy in a back office in some app that you might be writing the code for, and similarly, it's important to incubate organisms that have the relationality, the mutualism, and the holistic perspective codified into, and the interhiving codified into how they behave individually, interclustering, and then in relation to the commons that they might serve. And so before I take a turn into the case for the experiment that I was hoping to invite people to do together, any more questions popping up?
Sure, I can ask some short questions, then slides and invitation. Okay. Lightning round. Okay, Arun asked, isn't there a cyclic dependency of economic factors and happiness? For example, high inflation made everyone sad over 2024.
So there are time lag factors that impact how the economy operates and how individuals operate, and these are not necessarily in sync. One of the things that I found from the science of happiness was more effective ways to carry the suffering. And so some have that this change that just happened politically, for example, is a bad thing. Often when things break open, there are whole new realms of possibility to be had. And so happiness is not just about having all positive emotions. It's about well-being is the word actually I should be using, is about absorbing all of the signal that the universe is giving, all that's coming in, and then optimizing within that. And so the breaking down can also be a breaking open for what there is to become. And so that is not to say that there is a lack of struggle or pain or friction. One of the great intuitions for me that arose from studying people explaining active inference was how things emerge. And the person explaining it was using water And they were describing still water as being the way in which current conventions of how things got done and how people calculate it. So if you're in still water, if you're in a lake and you're trying to get across, the way you row your boat or the way you swim is all set by the conditions of the water. In flowing water, even though that same water has the same physical properties as still water, it weighs the same, no matter whether it's moving or not. When the friction of the water over rocks creates new dynamics that emerge, it creates whirlpools, right? And that those structures that persist, the creation of order out of disorder, allow for the emergence of also other meta patterns that are, again, described by informational mathematics rather than the physics of the water itself. And this is again trying to get at what is so hard to intuit. It's like, oh, whether it's a single whirlpool coming into existing or whirlpools interwhirlpooling into greater movements, that these frictions are also creative. And so to really be willing to settle into what you were calling the cyclical disconnect and asymmetry, as something that is a signal also that can be driving learning, driving better calibration, can be driving new learning, because at the heart of all of active inference is a mathematics of continuous learning. Yes.
I love that, and just flows like water with our previous sessions. Okay, next question, and then back into the flow we go. Social Design Studio wrote, so curious about the transition away from individualistic and mechanical into collective and organic. Where is the most levered locality to start?
Well, that's a great question. And here's a way in which I would answer this. In the world of project evaluation, so there's a point of view in the world of systems thinking. There's a certain order of what are the, Donella Meadows is well known for the way in which she created this categorization of ways to intervene in a system. And in the world of evaluating projects and programs, complex projects and programs over time, there's been some meta studies done about what are the things that best predict that if the supervision is done, attending to certain factors, what are the things that seem to produce effective and positive results? Because we're talking about complexity, you could pick 1,000 things, but in this research, they identified 3 things, and I'll add 2. The 3 things that they said, when people look at the following things, they tend to not only manage what they thought they were looking for, but also what emerges. In other words, managing the surprise and the unexpected more effectively. And these 3 things were looking at the interrelationality. Surprise, surprise, right? We're paying attention to the interbeing, and the interbeing across not just the individual or whatever our individual unit of focus was originally, but who are seeing the system more holistically. Second, multi-perspectivity, and the way that I describe this for myself is, I say, looking within, looking between, and looking beyond, having one or more disciplines and perspectives and ways of knowing about those lenses of attention on what is happening. If we look within, we often become a better compass for our own lives. If we look between, we often develop and harness the intelligence that collectively and the insight that we have. And when we look beyond, we often detect patterns that are beyond our collective purview that might break open and enable us to transform in powerful ways. So again, to return to that second point, multi-perspectivity, and I suggest with those three lenses, which is what I call the me to we to all, and it's kind of the label that I'm putting on this invitation I'm going to bring up later, is a good starting point. Is it enough? No, but it's a great starting point. And then thirdly, and here's where it gets messy, and is the non-answer to your original question, is scope definition. Because the moment you pick what are the boundaries, what is my Markov blanket? What are the boundaries of the map that I'm going to use as my lens? You begin to abstract everything else into what fits in that lens. So if you say we're going to have this conversation in English, the way that everything we describe will be denominated mostly in nouns instead of in verbs, and with concepts that exist in English but don't exist in other languages. And so the attending to what are the boundaries that we will use to focus is a gigantic mechanism for seeing how you're holding your attention. And so again, it's not a fixed answer, but it's a way of attending to perception. Again, repeating: relationships, diversity of perspectives, and scope definition. The other two that I like to add in that were not a part of that research. So that research, by the way, was 100 years of developmental evaluation, hundreds of studies, and so it's very robust. And you can go to the bank that's a good place to start building your dashboard, or not the dashboard, your conversations about the dashboard. The other two that I would add, and these in part come from active inference and from other systemic places and views, is looking at patterns. How are we, what are we clustering? And looking at flows. What are the core flows? Are we looking at energy? If we're looking at biological systems, are we looking at the water flows? Life organizes around water. So do we understand what are the core flows of information, of energy, whatever, in the system that we are observing? That gives us a key insight into the way in which causality unfolds, and causality organizes itself around, and that it's not the mechanistic geometry that we may have intuited in for the longest time, but that by looking at source, by looking at flow, we develop a better compass for the world.
Thank you. It's awesome, and the live chat is super lit. You'll see it after. In the last 20 minutes, do you want to share your slides and open the invitation letter?
Yes. So let me switch here to share. Share. Are you seeing my screen? Okay. So the invitation was to test a new way of organizing, and Fair Share Commons is a kind of a mutualistic co-op that first originated in the UK and has been endorsed by the financial. I should have written it down here because I can't remember like the Finance Trust Accounting Board of the UK. It's spread through many countries of the Commonwealth over the last 15, 20 years, and it's primarily an adapted form of organizational structure that is intended to both cultivate the practice of mutualism within the group. So it's kind of like a co-op in that everybody has power to participate. It's self-governing, and that it attends to the relationality of the founders, the workers, and external, whether they're investors or whether they self-organize. It's really there is a pattern language about forming co-ops, and one can use that pattern language to form these commons, and that these, whether they are to create ventures or to create full businesses, that the pattern language is useful for that effect. And so, as I described earlier, akin to Linux, it's intended to grow the commons, but also to support the application of those commons and build the organizational traits for successful ventures. And what I am hoping to find allies around. Let me. These are again suggested, and there are many ways to go about it. But there's certain core agreements that differ from, if you will, the extractivism, and the foundation is relationality, which drives mutualism and symbiosis. The invitation is to constitute one in service of the active inference community for growing both the commons and the capacity to prototype and develop both the experience of mutualism, but also projects. And that there be two starting experiments. The first around prototyping agents for accelerating access to money. So often folks incubating a new project are looking to find funding for that project, find funding for what that project might serve. And often there are people willing to fund those projects. And the idea of writing up what are the sources of different funding, what are the sources of what are the needs that they have that they're looking to fund? How do I discover and engage that funding is an important agent that can be used in common after common after common. And so possibly developing an agent, or there are plenty of methods, but agentifying, if you will, that component as one of the key flows. That in business, the flow of money is an important element to inactivate. And that the second is about finding resources of a different kind, competence and complementarity. And what are the components? Often, for example, the active inference community has a wide diversity of competencies, but it is highly technical. And so to engage with people who have complementary skills, and to support the accelerated discovery of allies, not only based on competencies, but also on other holistic considerations, is the attending to the flow of mutualism. And so those three actions is kind of a starting point, is something that I would like to, I'm already in action on the with other groups and a variety of groups on the constituting the legal structure of a fair sharing commons, and I would like to enroll the active inference community to become an ally with kind of other competencies and other types of mutualistic, eco-minded, socially minded groups to grow the capacity for mutualism. And it's early stage. I literally this is germinating, you could say, and really would like to find allies who, knowing that we don't have all the answers, but that we're willing to grow not just the methods, but the relational soil, is what this is really about. So, yeah, I'll stop there.
Awesome.
Questions?
Exciting. I can ask some questions from live chat, and we can explore just a little bit of a
Shall I leave this on the screen or keep going?
Sure, you can leave it up. I'll ask. Okay. There's a lot of great comments. I'll just start with the direct questions so people can add more in this last 15 minutes. Okay. Yep. Social Design Studio wrote, does the commons use emergent hierarchy so as to accommodate contextual expertise and thus relational power?
So, great question. And there are several definitions of commons, but I'm going to go with Eleanor Ostrom. She won the Nobel Prize for it, and she basically defined it as it's whatever Markov blanket people choose and then self-organize around. So there are many variations, and in order, she identified 8 principles for common to not just be a nice idea, but to be able to persist sustainably, right? Just to do a little sidebar, she was trying to make a business. The reason she won the Nobel Prize is because in the profession, everybody was explaining most of the economy's activities as either being driven through hierarchies or through marketplaces, the dynamics of those two collective groups. And she said there's a third kind of group, a common, and it has the following properties. And the socially mutualistic side of the world was just in love with her. And this is why she won the Nobel Prize, because she developed not only a body of science and a series of 8 principles that predictably describe those that succeed. These 8 include, a sense of boundaries that they have in common, and whether they decide to self-organize around a fishery, whether they decide to organize around a data commons, around a knowledge commons, that is up for the group to decide. And then the way in which they co-regulate. There were many variations, but basically there was there had to be agreements on where to place shared attention, and as people diverged from the norms, that there were ways to call them back into relationship and to have escalating consequences if people deviated. Now, all of that sounds lovely, but that was not enough either. There had to be the ability to enforce one's boundaries, not only internally, but externally. And so I'll give you an example. I have some First Nation friends with whom I've been meeting every Friday for years to work on decolonizing our minds. And they have a point of view about a piece of land that is their Garden of Eden and sacred, and how it should be used or not be used. And they use all these principles, but they cannot enforce their agreements on other people. And so they really, what they have is a wish list. I mean, I know that's kind of rude and they'll be very, very pissed to hear me say this, but without the capacity to enforce your boundaries, you don't have a commons. And so this idea of how enforcement happens, and whether that is done in a hierarchical manner or whether that's done by self-organizing, like when in Valencia recently there was a gigantic flash flood. The government did a very poor job for the first week, and the response was done by self-organizing ant behavior of neighbors helping neighbors, coming in, doing whatever they did. And that happens in crisis after crisis after crisis. And so there is a capacity to self-organize, if you will, and get things done. Often what a government structure can do is help prioritize, bring order to what are the most pressing needs, how to discern what will make the biggest difference collectively. And so there is a value to having a coordinating role, but how that emerges or evolves or unfolds is can either be by cultural precedent of what the rules are, or it can emerge through and from the group. So that's my long comment about commons and commoning and how to be in relationship to the common.
Awesome. I'll read a comment from Scott. Even before you mentioned Ostrom, Scott had written, Commons, Eleanor Ostrom, is a co-management regime framing, nicely consistent with active inference in human organizational contexts. See Scott Shackelford et al. At U of Indiana for Awesome's Commons programs. Commons analyses have historically been focused on, quote, asset-based commons. This nicely anticipates commons co-management beyond asset management, i.e. risk management, skills, coordination, etc.
Yep. I should have made the point that one of the things that commons do that the marketplaces and the institutions have not been able to do is, for example, it is financially rational to fish to extinction to deplete the forest because the price just keeps on going up. So the logic of markets is insufficient for sustainability. And this is why organizations that don't have a logic of that friction of considering other factors other than profit maximization will inevitably deplete the resource. And so what she created with this case for commons was that there were sustainable organizations and that these existed both in indigenous, in original peoples cultures, they exist throughout developed economies, they exist in a variety of places and are unrecognized. And what you're hearing in this invitation is like, let's use commoning, even though it's unfamiliar, even though it's different. It's actually much more widespread than we ever have experienced. It's like believing that there might be something other than McDonald's. You see McDonald's everywhere, so you think I have to eat burgers, but there are other ways to eat than McDonald's. And not trying to pick a fight with fast food, but
How are we going to carry this forward into 2025 and beyond?
yes. So the invitation to join a conversation is the beginning. One of the allies is that is both co-incubating other commons and that I wanted to use for if there's energy here is a group called Evolute 6, based in Germany and South Africa and UK. It's a small firm dedicated to incubating and helping commons type organizations grow. It's kind of so trying to both invite the interested to begin joining the conversation, sharpen a vision and an understanding of what it is that we think we can be in action on. What is it how that active inference can be applied to particular problems, the search for funding. There might be a better way. I had to scramble to get something plausible, but as we have conversations, we might very well identify much more important points of intervention. With the question that somebody else was asking earlier, we might decide that there's certain flows and certain dynamics that are in fact a better starting point than what I imagine right now. But the invitation is, come, let's convene and do this in a systematic way and both be transformed individually, interpersonally, and ripple out into the world.
Awesome. Okay, a few more questions while we're still here. Fraser wrote, I'm not sure what this language of trauma means. I'd like to hear this elaborated.
Yes. Excellent. Sorry, I forgot to explain that. So lately in psychology and in organizational psychology, there has become a modified use of the word trauma. And what it refers to is the equivalent of memory in computation. So you can have a traumatic event and be traumatized by it, and then the trauma, as I'm using it, is the memory, the scar that's left either in you, or if it's a collective trauma that has a different property. And I'll describe it in a moment. But when I say it's the memory, the scar is what remains in you, and how you carry that, whether you heal fully or whether it becomes a debilitating dynamic, is when the word trauma can be used to describe it. Collective trauma is, and this is an important distinction because sometimes the same language can create confusion. When I'm acting as an individual cognitive system, all the trauma happens within my body. So I feel something, I fix something, or I have a story about something happening to me. All of that is personal trauma. If I'm part of a hive, the hiving is happening in the signals that we are sending back and forth to each other. And so the language of how we signal and the meaning of what that means is what can become traumatized. And let me give you a simple little example. And those are called trauma agreements, ways in which you agree to carry the significance, the pain, the feeling about the situation that you're looking at. So my father took me fishing when I was 8 years old for the first time. And we caught a fish with fishing hook, and the fish was flapping and resisting, and I was kind of shocked. I'm like, oh my God, that fish is suffering. My father's like, no, 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 no. You just grab, whack them on the head, knock them out, and they don't feel pain. And in that moment, I entered into a trauma agreement, a different understanding of how to be with what I was observing. And as a group, we would talk about our reality, assuming that shared trauma agreement, that shared way of understanding. That same kind of dynamic, whether it is what it means to be a certain gender, what it means to be an organization that is beneficial to the world. Is it because it makes a profit? Is it because it makes a contribution? There's a whole series of assumed agreements that it's like, oh, we need to surface them, that they're not the truth. They are an agreement into which we stepped, and we're now willing to reevaluate. And this is both the gateway to disorientation, but also transformative adaptation, because it changes what has been a habitual way. When I started considering that maybe animals, I'm still an omnivore, but when I started considering that maybe animals had feelings, I had to start thinking differently about what had been my ordinary eating patterns. And so this is a language for surfacing anti-symbiotic ways of being, that we are now developing a pattern and a way of recognizing them and renegotiating them.
Awesome. Great answer. Last question. Music Minded wrote, how does Michael see the future of businesses? Or more simply, do you have exemplar businesses that are commons type in your view?
Yes, there's a whole range of commons businesses. And so even though we're talking here about incubating a new one, in a sense, I believe that the important work is about what I was describing about treating cancer, calling back into relation. And so some of us, and this, if there's interest in this, I've been working with global standard setting groups about how to measure and monitor well-being, and then so there's the sensing it, and then there's how do we digest it? And this was another benefit from active inference, was the way of framing the cognitive process, not just think, but sensing, integrating, predicting, responding, adapting, and really helping organizations think about, in that cognitive flow, in that collective cognitive flow, how to recalibrate their attention so that they see more of the world with a planetary denominator rather than an organizational denominator. And how do they then more skillfully interrelate with the different factors in which they're engaging?
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. Great presentation. A lot of people appreciated it in the chat. So see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.